So as of this vlog, as of this podcast, Hero Quest, a reprint, is up. And this has brought up some interesting dialogue in the community and some interesting focus on dungeon crawling board games. And if you've been following my vlogs or my channel, checking out my blog for any amount of time in terms of board gaming, you know that I really, really love dungeon crawler fantasy type board games. Part of this comes from Dungeons and Dragons. That has heavily influenced my gaming life. But at the same time, this idea of being able to sit down, play some heroes, explore a dungeon, fight some monsters, get some loot, level up, fight a boss, and have those bookends in a board gaming format is very, very enticing, is very, very interesting. And out of all the titles that I own, I have the original Hero Quest. I'm really, really excited for the reprint. I have medium weight titles out there like Runebound 3rd edition, and I have some heavier weight titles like Gloomhaven in terms of complexity and ideas. The question that I'm asking and that I'm wondering, and I'm not quite sure about this yet, to be honest with you, because as we acquire titles and as we play games, like we shift back and forth. I realized that mechanics, the taste for mechanics, change over time. But what I'm wondering is, and this is the question, I'm going to turn it over to you guys in the comments in a moment, have things gotten too complex for a board gaming type experience above and beyond, say like a Dungeons and Dragons or a role-playing game? And I think a lot of this stems from, if we look at Hero Quest as the DNA, one of the first dungeon crawlers, and I'm focusing on Hero Quest as opposed to Magic Realm for a moment, because they both try to replicate an experience, but Hero Quest took that experience, simplified it down, and essentially allowed you to have a D&D role-playing type experience with very little prep and minimal mechanics. But what we see is this idea, this holy grail, so to speak, of simulating, emulating, recreating an RPG experience where you don't have to do all the prep time, or the story's ready, or even better so, just being able to do it in a multiplayer format. This idea of all of us as a co-op going through a quest, maybe to solve a quest or see who the most powerful hero is. In my mind, a great example would be Runebound 2nd or 3rd edition. It's you and your friends versus the game. But in looking at something like Gloomhaven, have things gotten too complex? Because if we condense that timeline moving forward, Hero Quest leads us to Advanced Hero Quest. That leads us to other titles. We see like Descent, 1st edition, where you start adding on poison, paralysis, ambushes, traps, and things get more and more and more complex. Random monsters, more monsters, special abilities, activation dice, where putting aside expansion bloat for a second, have things gotten so complex where you tend to spend more time tracking the game, figuring out the game, and resolving rules instances than actually playing the game. And in revisiting Hero Quest, that simplicity, that elegance, yes, roll to move, okay, that's an 80s mechanic. Yes, the idea of opposing dice back and forth, how things operate from that perspective, one would say it is simplistic. We've moved well beyond that, but have we moved better beyond that? I love Gloomhaven, and with Gloomhaven, absolute genius. I'm going to put aside the length of the campaigns and the story, because that's really separate than the mechanics. That's completely separate. If I take one of the medium weight adventures, and no spoilers, I promise, if you're making your way through Gloomy, getting ready for Frosty, if I take one of those, there's a lot of interplay between the cards. There's a lot of interplay between conditions and effects and certain activations in a dungeon. It can be a little bit overwhelming, and I appreciate the choices and the complexity and the freedom. But if I'm just trying to immerse myself in a story, kind of like, do you want to control the game, or do you want the game to kind of tell you a story and see where things revolve out? I guess that's the difference between Euro or Ameritrash. But I find myself as I'm seduced into more and more Kickstarters, or potentially seduced, I find myself looking and saying, I kind of want something a little bit more simplistic. I want to return, and I have returned, to HeroQuest. I see looking at the titles in my collection and saying, I prefer a little bit of simplicity where we can just sit back as friends, roll some dice, and see where the adventures take us. So have things gotten too complex? And again, I could make a case and I could agree we don't need to roll back to HeroQuest simplicity. But what if it was more of a medium weight or light, heavy type game like Runebound 3rd edition to kind of tell that story? Have games gotten too complex and too unwieldy? And maybe that's why we're starting to see more and more games with apps step in. I'm seeing more and more Kickstarters releasing that. But that is a tale for another time.